Right, welcome everybody to our Risk and Assurance meeting today. I'd like to hand over to Councillor Zabelin to open our meeting with a karakia. Thank you, Councillor.
Ngā mihi e te tiamana. Me e noi tātou. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauriti, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tāki e. Kara.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll just run through some housekeeping and safety procedures. So this meeting is being recorded and will be live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. There are health and safety requirements which are shown on the display screen. Of note, on hearing a fire alarm, leave the site immediately by the nearest fire exit and evacuate to the assembly area, as noted on the screen. Smoking and vaping is prohibited within any council public entrance building or site. There is a defibrillator located outside on the entrance floor, and please report any near miss incidents to the committee administrator. Online participants, keep your cameras turned on and your microphones muted unless addressing the meeting. Councillors in person to select the option in the voting device if they wish to ask a question, comment or propose an amendment. Councillors online to use the hands up function. Any text for an amendment should be emailed to the committee administrator, and officers attending today, please make sure that you give your name and role before speaking. Today, in terms of apologies, we have an apology from Councillor Michelad for lateness and also the Mayor. Today we will have attending online Councillor Michelad, Councillor Harpeta and Councillor Johnson. There are no items or additional business items, and are there any declarations of interest? Okay, sorry, we will move those apologies. So, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Councillor. So that has been passed 10 in favour. As noted, there are no additional items. Do we have any declarations of interest? Take that as no. We have no public comment. So we will move to the next agenda item, which is confirmation of minutes. And we have minutes from the Risk and Assurance Committee meetings of the 11th of September, Part 1, 11th of September, Part 2, confidential, and 23rd of October 2024, Part 1, public. I'm happy to move. Councillor Naylor will second that, and we'll put that to the vote. and that's been in favour, 10 votes in favour and none against. So we will now move to agenda item 8, which is the health and safety report. At this point, I'd just like to check with councillors if they have any questions on the detailed attachment, which is in part 2. If you do, we'll move to that now. Otherwise, we'll deal with this report in the public part of the meeting. No? Excellent. So then I'll welcome Selwyn Ponga Davis to the desk. Thank you, Selwyn. We're in your good hands.
Right hand button. Kia ora tātou, tui te rangi e tūnei, tui te papa e ora nei, karanga te pō, karanga te Aotearoa mauri ora, te wi o rangi tāne tēnā koe. I le mate o gana Nico Gill o Manisi Brigade, 16 Field Regiment, moi moi rā, moi mai rā, moi mai rā. I te rangatira, the chair, Wade, councillors, senior leadership in staff, North City Council, tēnā koutou katoa. I thought I'd take this time just to acknowledge the passing of Gunnar Gill last week during tragic events, and just acknowledge NZRT 4 and emergency services and their efforts to awhi the support around his recovery. I'm free to take any questions regarding my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Selwyn. I have a couple of questions. You note in your report that it's been some 5 months now since we've had a high potential incident reported through the infrastructure group. Could you just outline for me what are the activities within that group for which there have been no reports, the high risk? What's the nature of the activity that that group carries out?
Across council, we have 12 critical risks, in particular to our frontline workers in their space, working at heights, working in excavation work, working around plant, particular high risk for the industry. We've done extensive work, especially around working around services. We have implemented lots of standovers during that activity. The service plans haven't always been accurate, but I'm confident that post-action, we've carried all the actions that we've required when we have events. Thankfully, we haven't had anything significant at this time.
So you're confident, Selwyn, that it's actually a clean slate. It's not an issue around contractors not reporting or we're missing incidents?
No, I'm confident that we're getting a really great culture of reporting across contractors and within our own network.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Selwyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Selwyn. Just had a question around, I guess, the safety checks and maintenances that are run in our resource recovery fleet. Saw a couple specific mentions in the report around some incidents or near misses that had come around, kind of equipment failure type things associated with those vehicles, and just wanted to understand proactively what are we doing around maintenance and safety checks of that equipment.
Through the chair, my advisors work closely, especially with their, because they work a lot around plant. They have had some incidents, in particular when engaging temps, making sure they've been getting sufficient information and instruction on how to use the equipment. There had been some fail points, but my advisors have done some extensive work in terms of these safety plans and JSCAs around the equipment they use.
So that's kind of if I'm hearing you right, that's kind of the people side of things in terms of making sure that temps or people that come into that environment have the information they need. Is in terms of the actual maintenance and inspection of the fleets, like what's in place there?
So through PeopleSafe, we have schedules, but I'd like to delve into that a little bit deeper and come back to you on that question in terms of what's happening in that space as well.
And is there a mechanism where when incidents occur, those schedules are reviewed?
Oh yeah, definitely. As part of our ICAM investigation process, we'll take a look at the risk registers, see if they're fit for purpose, our hazards, and definitely any processes that need to be mitigated.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is possibly more to the Chief Executive regarding recommendation 2, that the Chief Executive release attachment 2 as is practical. As far as I can see, it's been quite some time since we've released one of these reports to the public. So I just want to make sure, A, is that recommendation correct, and B, when would be practicable?
Through the chair, so I read that as releasing parts of attachment 2 as is practicable rather than the entire part of it. So it's just parts that relate to, you know, people's names and those sorts of things, whether or not we'd need to redact things and before it's been released as well. So is that clarified that for you?
Just a question, is that a change? Because I don't believe we've had a recommendation like this for the last 2 or 3 of these reports.
Yeah, it's probably a standing recommendation, I would suggest, as part of this. So that part, the parts that are in part 2 in particular, relate to staff, people, events, and those sorts of things. So we do just need to run a lens across it to see what might be released as part of those reports.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, Selwyn. My question was about being approached by other councils for our front-facing kaimahi package for the front-facing workers and specifically around critical risk 1. Does that sign that we are leading the partners in this space, or we're getting some recognition for more widely than the organisation for what we're doing to equip our staff to this increased risk?
Part of our relationship with MWLS is just around the sharing of information and training, and it would be remiss of me not to share the ideas that we've learned. We've had great facilitators in the past. It has been costly, and it hasn't really shared information that we need our staff to have. So in doing that, the development of our own situational awareness program has been really good. We've had positive results, and we've shared that with MWLS, who have been quite interested in what we're doing.
Great, thank you. That was all from me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'm just looking at page 29, attachment 3, at the numbers of staff who've attended training. So is each column the number for just that quarter?
Yeah, that's correct. So some of those numbers are taken from PeopleSafe, but also Connie's team manage some of the training outputs. But I can check about those columns and get back to you.
Yep. So just looking at the totals for the quarter, for the last 4 quarters and this quarter, it just appears the last 2 quarters the numbers have dropped off a bit in terms of the number of staff attending training being 104 and 133 compared to the 3 quarters prior to that. It was quite a lot more, and I'm just wondering if there would be a reason for that.
I'd have to get back to you. That could be about operational tempo available to attend this training, but I can get back to you, Councillor.
Okay, and just further to that, how is training identified? Is that through the performance appraisal process, or how does a staff member attend training if they wish? Do they put up their hand, or is it identified by someone else?
So that's identified by their own manager in terms of the competency framework. So depending on the type of work they're doing, especially in the health and safety space, they would need to track that. I don't have the ability to do that. Maybe Connie can comment on that later.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Selwyn. I was interested to read on page 17 about large numbers of rats. Has this increased?
Honestly, I'd have to get back to you on that one, councillor.
Okay,
That's just from the data that we receive.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is under control?
I'll have to get back to you.
Okay.
Yep.
Obviously goes with the territory. Thank you.
Selwyn, I also have another question just on hazardous substances. Have we had recent incidents dealing with hazardous substances, and where are we at in terms of training or identifying concerns within the organisation? Is this a matter that is causing you any concern at the moment?
Not currently. What we are waiting for is the release of our safe management framework, which talks a lot about the standards for hazardous substance. And within that, once we have that accepted across, once it gets to SLT, we can further develop the training that's required, especially around the handlers and also person in charge. Currently, I'm the person in charge of all hazardous substance across PNCC.
So have we had an incident recently with hazardous material in the last sort of 6 months?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Selwyn. There are no further questions for Selwyn, so thank you. Thank you very much.
Kia ora tātou.
We have a recommendation to the committee that the committee receive the memorandum titled the Health and Safety Report 1st July to 30 September 2024, presented to the committee on the 27th of November, and that the Chief Executive release attachment to as is practicable. I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Naylor. We'll now open that to comment. Are there any comments? And it appears that we have no further comment on this report. So happy to put that recommendation to the vote. Carried unanimously. So we will now move to agenda item 9, the Wellbeing Report, and I'd like to welcome Connie Roos and Wayne Wilson to the desk.
Tēnā koutou. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about well-being. I would like to note that the highlight for this quarter was the Mental Health Awareness Week, where we had the opportunity to work closely with our people leaders and give them some tools and resources to actually increase the awareness of all the support mechanisms that is available in our organisation. So on that note, I accept the report as read and would welcome any questions regarding to the report. Thanks.
Thank you, Connie. Do we have any questions? Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Connie and Wayne. Just one question from me on page 36 regarding 1.1 around the offboarding survey results. There's a comment here I don't quite understand. It says most staff that did not complete the survey during this period are those in operational roles with limited email access. What does that mean? Is that we weren't able to contact them once that left?
Yes, that was a bit of a learning curve for us in the sense that it's the first time that there was such a significant amount of resignations in the operational space. So normally when we do surveys, we will cater with paper surveys. The standard offboarding process runs basically as an online link that people receives. So I feel like we, in future we will explore what alternative ways we can have to ensure that we do have responses from our operational staff leaving the organisation.
Great. Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Connie. Similarly, around the offboarding survey results and acknowledging that the sample size is quite small. So
Yes.
I'll put this as a hypothetical. But if you end up with a spike around manager supervisor being given as a reason during that offboarding, kind of what then happens?
So I would like to emphasise that it's only 7 responses that we had during this quarter, so you're right. I did look at the verbatim or open-ended responses. In the context of this specific quarter, it seems like there was a theme around some of the respondents believe that some of our managers needs more training to be effective in their roles. But in saying that, if we look at the overall picture in the organisation, it may not be such a significant issue at this stage. But for this particular quarter and this particular spike, that was the sentiment expressed in the open-ended questions.
Great, thank you. So again, kind of pursuing this on a hypothetical basis, I guess I'm just trying to understand how the loop ultimately gets closed on that kind of information. So if there were, significant information did come through around offboarding and it was related to manager supervisor, kind of what's in place that allows that loop to be closed?
Yes, so we do have a program of works that I would personally make sure, I would verify that we do have initiatives in place that would address problem areas. For example, we are doing a significant piece of work on ways of leading people at the moment, which would start early next year. So I would assume, or hypothetically, believe that that program will, in the long term, have a significant impact on some of the sentiments that was expressed in this particular quarter.
Great, thank you. My second and final question is just around the health and eye checks, which are reported in a table on page 32 as being 11 of those in the quarter and 26 in the average quarter for the last year. I just wondered if those uptake levels are sufficient or if there's any concerns around kind of staff accessing that service.
We have made improvements for staff to access it, but the 26, it depends, I feel like it fluctuates, I would say. So the improvements we've made is that people can select right through the year instead of just certain time periods. Yeah. Yes, so it does fluctuate. I feel like we would have a better idea if there's an issue over the course of the year than only in the first quarter.
Great, thank you. Will future reports allow us to kind of keep an eye on how that trend's going over time?
We'll keep an eye on it, and yes, I will maybe get back to you if there's any information in that context that I'm missing, but we will keep an eye on it.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harpeter.
Mr. Chair. Thanks, Connie and Wayne. Just looking at your enhanced wellbeing training, just wondering which of those programs that you've offered has been the most successful?
I would need to go back to our survey results to do an analysis on that. I cannot answer that at the top of my head, but we do not accept any of, if there's low scores or if any of the workshops presents data that indicates a problem, we will address it immediately. So we would assume that all of those are on a satisfactory level, but I would have to go and check what course specifically has the highest scores on the evaluation, course survey evaluation data. I do not have that at the top of my head.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at ACC lost time and injuries non-work related seems to be getting up there. There's page 38, sorry. There's some boxes at the beginning of that graph which are blank. How are we tracking historical wise with, you know, those sort of injuries? And what are we doing to mitigate that?
Yeah, specifically on the non-work injuries, they're injuries that have happened outside of work, obviously, and for a lot of them, they're the reconstruction type. You know, when you've had like a knee replacement or something like that. Yeah,
Yep.
so you understand that they're quite long and lengthy. So those non-work ones, there's in that total of 307 days, there's 19 staff involved. So on average, they're very long period ones. We try to, obviously, we work with the health professionals to get people back to work as soon as possible, because that's has been proven to be the best thing for anyone who's off work, is to get them back as soon as possible. But they are long-term ones. There's not a lot we can do with it without the assistance of those medical professionals.
Bodies break down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. There are no further questions, so thank you very much, Connie and Wayne. We have a recommendation to the committee that the committee receive the memorandum. Oh, Councillor Naylor, did you have it? No? That received the memorandum titled Wellbeing Report, 1 July to 30 September 2024, presented to the Risk Insurance Committee on the 27th of November 2024. I'm happy to move that. Councillor Naylor will second that, and we'll put that to the vote. Oh, we won't put that to the vote. We'll open it up for commentary now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, just want to acknowledge once again a really good report on staff wellbeing, and once again a continued reduction in staff turnover is a really positive sign. I guess no doubt it'll flatten off at some point, but it's still tracking downwards, which is positive. Just also want to acknowledge those 3 staff members who passed away last year and the one this year. That would obviously be quite a challenging situation for colleagues, and just wanted to acknowledge that also as reported on page 36.
Thank you, Councillor. There are no further comments in the queue, so we'll put this recommendation to the vote. That has been carried unanimously, so thank you for that. We will now move to item 10 on the agenda, which is the Business Assurance Accountability Report. I'd like to welcome Yui Ting Chang and Desiree Viggers to the front desk. Welcome. We're in your hands.
Yeah, I'll put that on for you. Kia ora koutou, Mr. Chair, councillors. This is just an administrative report, the 6-monthly accountability report to you with update on progress of items that are being monitored by the committee. I have had Yui compile that report for me. She's seated here with me today, and hopefully I've got a set of friends in the back if we need questions. We're probably a little bit further ahead today than we thought we might be, so hopefully they are somewhere quickly in case.
Thank you both for the report. Just looking at page 44 and the number of reviews that are completed and in progress, particularly having 68 reviews in progress and the total of 207, it does strike me that that's a lot of reviews. How do you feel that it's going in terms of workload, or how do you, is that an appropriate amount of work at one time to be progressing, or is it a lot?
Yep. Okay. Oh, yep. Through the chair. So I'd like to draw your attention to the table. There's a change in completion at the bottom. Yeah, so as you can see, this time we've got an increase in 1% and then a decrease of 7% from incomplete items, and then we've got an increase in 8% of completed items. So this shows you that the recommendations from the past accountability round to this accountability round have moved from in progress to completed. So to answer your question, it's 68 is 68 because of the total number of reviews we have, but also we've added 2 new reviews there. And this is exactly what we would expect, you know, that you move from in progress to completed, and yeah.
So just in terms of workload and working through that many reviews at once, is that likely to be completed in the expected time frame?
So I think that really depends on, so the 68 are split into all these various reviews, and they belong to all the different areas in council, so that really depends on each specific area. So I can't say yes for or no for all. It really depends. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that.
you.
Thanks. Just perhaps following a little bit along Councillor Naylor's line of questioning, are we tracking kind of overall timeframes from when something's identified to when it's actually resolved?
Yes, we are tracking that, but you will also know that this report's about 20-ish pages, and that's why we haven't put that in, but I can get you that information if you'd like.
I think that the date that the report was presented is actually in each individual one, and some of them are a little bit older, and that's certainly something that we put forward, but it sort of depends, I guess, on progress and how things are going in each individual area, maybe where we're going with that.
Thanks. Without straying into comment, but I guess just to contextualize what I'm kind of trying to get at here, would it be possible to kind of get an overall track of just the average of, you know, how many years it's taking to go from things starting to things actually being ticked off at the end? Because it's a little bit hard reading through all these dozens and dozens of actions to get a sense of timeliness. And
Yeah. You should see the spreadsheet. That is.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's solid. Not a spreadsheet person, but have to be now. Yeah, we can definitely do that. Yes.
And then I guess further to that, how do we reflect on, let's say it takes 3 years for something for very good reason. But kind of during that 3 years, kind of what is do we have an additional kind of level of risk or exposure because we kind of know there's a thing, but we haven't actually fixed it?
Well, I guess it depends on exactly what it is and how much work we need to do, or how much progress is going to need to be had in that space, and what kind of funding and resourcing. So there's a lot in each piece. So most of them won't be done immediately, and you know, setting a path or a course for them is part of this process, and that's why I guess you get all of these individual items and see the progress or lack thereof, I guess.
All right. Thank you both. Do appreciate it. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, through the chair, the work program, just to answer a couple of the questions that have been raised so far, we do review this work program, and hence the reason why it comes back through this committee as well, just to get a bit of direction around some things. There are some other items, so we've got another review coming up as well around health and safety, which will kick off very shortly as well. And so what we're doing is that we are having a look at this program and then kind of having to reprioritise some work based on the resources that we currently have in place. We do have the option as well to outsource some of the reviews if we need to as well, and we are actively considering that. But it is to come to your point as well, perhaps Councillor Barrett is providing another sort of summary at the top of how we're going, when did things start, and when they finish, and the time frames associated with those. So we'll take those notes on board and look at how this might be presented in the next round.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Wade. Look, I had a question which was on the same line of thinking as the two previous questions, and I appreciate, but I sense it might be more than just a pure reporting thing. I mean, if you take IT disaster recovery as just an example, my question would be, well, we know this is a significant risk area for the business. We've identified actions and an initial agreed date to complete those actions, which is January of 21. We're now targeting December 24 and we're in progress. So my question to you, Wade, is, to me, is there a disconnect? Is there an issue here about actually making sure we're resourced and we're aggressively pursuing and knocking these things over? What do we need to change to avoid, in another 3 years' time, looking at a similar set of recommendations and finding that we've not made sufficient progress?
Yes, all of those sorts of things are in our consideration as well, and part of the review of this program is having a look at where have the bulk of these reviews come from as well. Some of them have come from Audit New Zealand through annual plan process or LTP type process. We have some other internal reviews as well where we're needing to have a look at how we go about things. There is this committee which then also sets a direction about various programs that we have in front of us. It is a large number of reviews that are still currently underway and started quite some time ago. I guess what's happened is that we've had a layer on top of a layer on top of a layer actually come in, and we're probably getting to a point now where this committee is starting to kind of get its way through that and set some clearer direction for my team to actually understand what are the priorities and things that we need to. I'm certain that what will happen potentially out of the end of today, once we've signed off all of the strategic risks, is that will start to set a direction about what things do we start looking at next inside this organisation to make sure that we're taking care of those strategic risks and mitigating the impacts of those, and how we go about doing those and doing deeper dives into things like cyber security, health and safety, and some of those things that have a critical impact on our organisation, and that's where we'll probably start to see the gains. I think that there's a number of potential reviews in here, and so the team are having to kind of prioritise some things. There's some potentially some reviews in here where we could make some adjustments quite quickly without too much more effort, but it's just actually finding the time to put that effort in.
Thank you for that. Councillor Zabelin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question also kind of relates to everything that's just been said, but it's just a really specific, perhaps illustrative example. It's about the business continuity planning review and the table there, which is on page 45. That first reference there talks about that business continuity plans are confirmed and exercises run across council. And there's a note there from the manager that there's an intention to review and confirm those in the next 6 months, first 6 months of 2025. And so my question, sort of relating to what we were just talking about, is what assurance is there that we can prioritise and resource that work within our existing frameworks, given that it's been on there for quite a long time, perhaps that resourcing or prioritising hasn't been there in the past?
yeah, my understanding is that SLT have actually recently considered this, and I might get Jason to come down and offer some words if he's got something to add.
You'll get to, just while Jason's walking down, you can come down there and then you can add on any comments that you might like. So it is this is a priority area for us. So business continuity, how do we get ourselves up and operating again quickly in the event of a potential disaster? We potentially might have had one in this building not that long ago if Councillor Mickelard hadn't been in the building at 10 p.m. at night, turning water taps off, is that our downstairs service centre may have been out of operation for quite some time. What do we do in those situations to get ourselves up and operating quickly? So I have tasked Kerry Lee and Jason with not necessarily waiting for all BCPs to be up and operating before we start running exercises, that we complete them and we run an exercise on those particular areas to start ticking them off to make sure that they're operating effectively. So doing that inside the next 6 months of next year, it's squarely on the senior leadership team's radar to get these completed.
Great. Thank you.
I think you've covered it well, thank you, Wayne.
Excellent.
That's all from me, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. There are no further questions. So we have a recommendation. So thank you, Yui and Desiree. We have a recommendation that the committee receive the memorandum titled Business Assurance Accountability Report and its attachment presented to the Risk and Assurance Committee on the 27th of November 2024. I'm happy to move that. Councillor Naylor is seconding that, and we'll now throw it open for comments from elected members. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, as indicated through my questioning, I guess my observation is looking at this report that there's an awful lot of, a lot of activity that's happening and a lot of reviews in progress. I guess my perspective is that, there's a lot of really important work here, but I think prioritisation is key. I think from my perspective, prioritise what's important and complete those well in a timely way. I feel that 68 reviews in progress does seem a lot, particularly where some departments have got 14 or 19 reviews happening simultaneously all at the same time. It seems like a lot. I guess other entities that I've been involved in, have sort of identified 5 or 6 internal audit programs for the year and focused on those things. I'm not suggesting it has to be that small, but I guess that the issue with having so many reviews underway, I do question sometimes how whether the outcomes can be, really well embedded if there's so much activity happening. But those are just my observations. But a good report and good to see how things are tracking.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks. Much along the same lines, I think quite a useful line of questioning developed across Councillor Naylor and others as that paper was presented. And so would simply concur with what Councillor Naylor has said. And I think, for me, the principal concern that I feel is around the potential that we end up in a situation where there is an eventuated risk or series of risks that are significant, and then it comes to light that, well, there was actually some work, but it was simply languishing for a lack of priority, and I don't want to see us being the council that's in that situation. So really appreciate the Chief Executive's contribution to the conversation, acknowledging that some of these are probably reasonably easily addressed. It is just that finding the time. So as Councillor Naylor said, prioritization, making sure that we can really get a substantially advanced report and in the next time we see this in the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. The queue is now empty, so we will put this recommendation to the vote. That's carried unanimously, 11 votes in favour. We'll now move to agenda item 11, the Strategic Risk Management Report, and welcome Stephen Minton and Desiree Viggers back to the front desk.
Hello again. This report represents quite a lot of work that has been done, and just wanted to thank SLT for this, and for Stephen for pushing it all forward. It's the last tranche of strategic risks that have been analysed for the committee, and I'm sure Stephen has an introduction for you with a bit more detail.
Good afternoon, Stephen Minton, Risk Management Advisor. As Desiree says, this is the last of our last 5 of our 11 strategic risks. Just to remind you that these are drafted up by myself in consultation with owners and subject matter experts within the council. They go through an approval process with the risk owner individually, and then are presented to SLT as a collective for them to sign off collectively before they come to this chamber. So I'll take any questions now if you have any.
The CEO will just make a couple of comments.
Also, just to add to the commentary, in reviewing this, I just like to, for councillors to maybe have a think about strategic risk 11. I know that this was a risk, an additional strategic risk that was added. I think the conversation might have been around resident satisfaction surveys and sort of popped up around that time, but it's the one about loss of public trust. I just perhaps my comments on this strategic risk is that if we don't get something right in the other 10, strategic risk number 11 will happen anyway. So I just, through the chair, perhaps elected members might wish to think about whether or not it is actually a strategic risk, or whether it's a consequence of us not doing the other 10 particularly well.
Thank you. So with that in mind, we'll go to questions, and Councillor Zabelin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora koroa. Just trying to find where to start. I think my first question is relating to strategic risk number 5, which is ineffective relationship management and stakeholder engagement. And just noted for central government advocacy, we've rated our control rating as ineffective, and the action plan or considerations there was about budget allocations for advocacy. I wondered whether in your conversations with the risk owners, whether you'd explored other approaches to advocacy outside of budget allocations, some outside the box thinking, or other ways we could do it to help us be more successful than we have been of late?
I think the answer is I haven't had that discussion. Perhaps the owner of the advocacy function might like to comment. Perhaps David, have you got some views on that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. There is a advocacy role that sits in the organisational structure at the moment. For a bunch of reasons, that hasn't been able to be prioritised with pressures on the remuneration budget. As it happens, I'm finalising a paper at the moment that's going to SLT to talk about how we resource the advocacy function going forward, given those budget constraints. So at the moment, we do fund the Te Utanganui Program Director $100,000, who does a lot of advocacy on that economic development opportunity linked to the ring road. But we have a couple of vacancies in the organisational planning and performance LTP role, and we're looking at whether or not we add a specific advocacy function to that role, because it's a role that works across the council. So there's some active work about how we best manage that function within the budget constraints that we're operating within.
Right, thank you. So it's fit things first, get people lined up. Great, thank you. Just underneath that was council-controlled organisations, and we've rated that as partially effective control rating. And I was just looking at the definitions of partially effective versus ineffective, and I was just curious about that distinction. If partially effective means that significant process changes may be required, and I was curious as to what significant changes we might require and how we undertake our business with our CCOs. What's the significant change that would be required for that to be considered effective?
It's probably bordering on partially effective versus effective, I guess. I wouldn't say that there are significant changes. Some of the processes do need to have a bit more rigorousness placed around them to sort of bring them to where we would like to see them in the effective state.
All right, thank you. So it's more in the way of a tweak as opposed to a major change.
Correct.
Okay. So under effective, the definition there says there may be some minor control weaknesses or system improvements that management could make to improve the controls or efficiency. So we're sort of straddling that. It's more than that, but less than a significant change.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I had some other questions about number 9, which I'll just try and pull up really quickly. Number 9, which was significant disruption to council's continuity and or lifeline utility disruption. Officer readiness being identified as ineffective there was a bit concerning. And the whole read was a little bit concerning. So I'm just wondered if you had more information for us about how we're in such a place in the first place, and we've obviously got some steps to lead us out of there, but how well are those resourced? Which ones are new actions, or which ones are BAU? It's a lot of questions in there, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I might ask Jason to come down if I don't get everything answered correctly, but within the SIMS model, which is the National Model for Emergency Management, there are functions and training for all of those functions. There has been some training, but the number of, I guess, officers that have completed the training is sort of significantly below par and to allow us to sort of meet those expectations, but there is a strong push now for a lot of that training to be occurring. The identification of where the training needs to be done, which officers need to do it, and time frames are being laid down as to when that needs to be done. Jason, I don't know if you have anything more to add, perhaps around sort of the genesis of where we are.
Yeah, no, you've covered that off well, Stephen. Jason McDowell, Manager of Emergency Management. Following the organisation review that Wade introduced in July, and we had a review of a lot of the reviews at the North Island weather events took place, and there was a lot of learnings and lessons that came out of that. So following coming to SLT in August, we provided some options and some opportunities for council to really engage in some training, and really proud of the organisation for the uptake that it's taking in this space. Where we're sitting with our basic training was sitting around the 30% mark. By February, with the booked-in training that is taking place, we'll have 70% of our staff trained at the foundation course. A huge credit to managers across the organisation, and particularly SLT, for asking that of our staff to be trained at that level. There's a lot of work happening around ensuring that we have enough people that we can rely on for an emergency. We have to factor in the things such as people not being available. It could be sickness, people being affected themselves. So what we've asked, what we're working towards is by the end of June this financial year, we would have met the minimum target. That would be 6 people trained in each of our functions, and 4 controllers and a lot of other roles in that space that support the EOC. And then the following 18 months later, having an additional, moving that up to 10 people that would be in each function, and then moving up to 14 over another 18 months after that. So that would allow us to have enough redundancy for all of our functions. It would also be able to enable us to
stand up and support the rest of the region if that request was also asked. But it's when you think about a large scale event like Christchurch, that EOC was operating for 10 weeks and staff were exhausted after that period of time. So it's around factoring and looking at all of those elements. So I'm confident that we're going to get to those targets. I'm really excited about the uptake that the organisation's had in emergency management training, particularly when my goal for the basic foundation was set at 50% by June. So it's real credit to the whole organisation and supporting emergency management in this space.
That's great, thank you. So we're taking those learnings and just lifting our game and have a plan to continue to do so for the foreseeable. Great, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. My question relates to strategic risk number 8, failure to meet legal obligations outlined on page 75, particularly the one that's rating is ineffective, which is rates setting and valuation role. Just wanting to understand, it says set order of resolutions with legal review and anyway, can we just get a bit of an understanding? I don't quite understand what that's talking about.
Yeah, so from a risk management perspective, if we have a failure in a control, then we will change the rating on that until we're satisfied that the controls are working properly. So I think if you might recall, earlier this year there was a failure in the rate setting through council with the within the agenda, and I think there was a need for a special meeting to then redo it. So because of that, I've downgraded the rating, but the expectation that a review of the process will bring that back into how it should be.
Okay, so that those resolutions
solely
are
the
talking
reason.
about council resolutions.
Yeah, which are prepared by officers.
Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, a couple follow-ups from some of the answers given. Around resourcing, is there an a priori assumption that we have to solve things within current resourcing?
At the moment, most of the improvements or considerations or action plans, unless there's a specific statement around the need for budgetary allocation, most of the work is considered BAU improvements. Like, for example, the Asset Management Improvement Plan, which is a significant piece of work over multiple years and contributes a lot to the risk ratings on some of them. That has been dealt with within BAU activities.
Yeah, so the question then would be in cases where it isn't.
So, for example, the advocacy one, there was a comment there about budgetary allocation. There's a question as to whether there's budget available for that, and that's why there's that comment put in there.
Thanks. So I guess in terms of you delivering your role in these reports, you're encompassing things where there is a need for resourcing and ensuring that signal.
We try to identify that, and if the budget's specifically not available, then try to make comment on it.
Great, thank you. Second follow-up question is really just around trying to understand from your perspective whether controls that are rated as ineffective are really controls, or are they actually part of the risk?
You can have controls that are ineffective, and that could be because of the design of the controls not being done properly, or simply complacency on the part of officers or other things. So while they may be ineffective, there needs to be work done around how those controls are improved or made effective, and that may require design control changes.
So in the number of cases now where we see things as being ineffective, we would expect over time that could change.
If it didn't change, then probably you are right, they aren't controls.
Right, okay, thank you. I think my next questions are around, sorry, just trying to find where I'm at here. I guess broadly kind of how we link actions to conclusions. Like how have you linked the actions on the right-hand side to the conclusions that are drawn?
I guess it's just an overall assessment of where we are and trying to summarise them in buckets of actions to come up with a conclusion in what's a relatively small space of what you might call a very brief executive summary. There obviously is a lot of work that's done in the background, and in some of the strategic risks, there's a lot of background paperwork that's held as well. But I try to sort of summarise my view in agreement with the risk owner as to where we're sitting overall.
So that conclusion is derived from the actions rather than used to drive the actions?
It's probably a combination of both, depending on which ones we're looking at. Some of the conclusions do get into what the actions or improvements are that are needed. I try to be more forward-looking than backward-looking in the conclusions.
Thanks. If I can give a specific example around risk 10, which was the failure to manage assets. The conclusions, to my reading, are quite strong on budget. So as a direct quote in the conclusion, timeliness of inspection and renewals and the requisite resource allocation is the single largest potential failure point. To my reading of the actions, I really didn't see anything there that addressed resource allocation against what is acknowledged as the single largest failure point. So I guess that's where I'm trying to understand how the connection is made between conclusions and actions and which is driving which.
Yeah, so so I'm just trying to locate the words that you said, which it's within the conclusion here, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So if we look at, for example, within the categories, there's asset inspection and maintenance schedules. I guess that there's a direct link between that category and the comments within the conclusion, for example.
All right, thank you for that example. I guess finally just interested around kind of visibility between actions and kind of their resourcing. There's a lot of actions and it's a little bit hard for me as a elected member to kind of understand kind of what the resourcing implications are, what the potential time frame is, and what expectation we might have around that thing changing next time we're together in the chamber. And I'm just wondering, you know, what information could be brought into this reporting that could give us better insight in terms of kind of resourcing and timeframes and what we might expect going forward?
There are some actions in here that possibly could be fixed up before Christmas. There are others that may not be fixed up before next Christmas. So I take your point that the delivery timeframes is perhaps not that visible. Obviously, as we've indicated, as we go through iterative reviews next year,
yeah,
there'll definitely be some visibility around the delta between now and then. And I guess we can, as we go, given this is the first round and it's really just setting the scene as to where we are, going forward, the narrative will be not just on scene setting, which has already been done, but around the progress and where the blockages and hold-ups are and those sorts of things. So we can address them as we come back with these individual risks next year.
Great, thank you. Out of the many dozens of actions across all of these now, do you have a tally of how many of them are new and how many of them are kind of the BAU type things that you described before?
I'd be sort of making this up a little bit, but my sense would be that there are quite a few that are BAU or improvements that had already been identified. And I'll take again the same example of the Asset Management Improvement Plan. That's been something that's been around for a couple of years. It's a huge piece of work and it's been done as BAU. The process of creating these strategic risk documents, though, has, as we've gone through, identified things that maybe haven't been intuitively known about, but we haven't documented. And so it's brought some more formalisation around the identification of things that need to be done to improve, or actions that need to be done.
Great, thank you. Finally, I promise, Mr. Chair, one of the actions that was in place around the strategic, sorry, not strategic, but the relationships management, I think it was risk number 5. At the bottom of that list is kind of linkages with other councils. And one of the key actions on the right-hand side was to regularly review LGNZ membership. And I just kind of wondered how constant review of membership in a significant nationwide organization actually delivers on building effective relationships within that organization.
I'd probably have to defer to one of my colleagues to answer that one. I mean, I do watch the news, but beyond that, I don't have a lot to say. Maybe David might have an idea, or the Chief Executive. Through the Chair. I might just take that one on notice and then come back to you if that's okay. SLT did have a good hard look over all of these, and I guess some regard brought them through to get a view from elected members about certain actions and points in that, and you've all raised some good points all the way through here. Reviews of organisations or memberships of such as part of, relationships, but it might be something that pops up from time to time, but it has. Local government New Zealand membership has popped up, but not for a formal debate as such at this particular point in time. So again, we'd probably be looking at, and I think some of the questioning that you're talking about is alluding to, what are the priorities and how do we get the best out of these in order to mitigate some of the risks that are in here. And we'll take a look at that one and just see where that might sit from time to time.
Thank you for that. That does conclude the questions that I have at this stage. Thank you both. And thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to indicate that I do have an additional recommendation forward-looking just around how we approach the reporting.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one further question from me. Just in terms of process, I note that the recommendation in this report is just to receive these. If elected members have an interest in seeing any of the actions or any content of this changed or added to, what would be the most appropriate process for that? Is that just a matter of comment and leave it with the CE to consider, or do we need specific recommendations if we want to see change?
Yeah, through the Chair, I'm not trying to predict what it is that you might ask, but we might, whether or not there needs to be some kind of catch-all of any particular changes or issues and things that you're wanting to have captured or picked up through here, without seeing what it is that you're suggesting. It might be a little bit difficult to suggest how that is at the moment.
I can be a little bit more specific. In terms of the central government advocacy and the only action there, this is on page 71 under relationship management that's been discussed earlier. The only action is consideration for budget allocation for advocacy, and I guess my view is the utilisation of elected members is quite a key function for elected members in terms of advocacy, and so that sort of is not acknowledged at all there, and I'd like to see that included, rather than assuming that central government advocacy is solely a staff responsibility. So, I mean, that would be something I'd like to see changed. I'm just wanting to get some clarity about whether we can just input into through comments about things like that, or whether that would need to be a specific resolution.
Yeah, perhaps a comment on that one is that I don't think that you would need to put a specific resolution in around that. I think that the direction that the elected members set through their long-term plan and the goals and aspirations and outcomes that you're looking to achieve as a city are acknowledged through our strategic plans and the like. The risks are identifying, do we have a gap somewhere? How do we go about filling that? Any budget allocation then comes back through elected members in terms of budget process and the like in that as well. Mr Murphy's already talked about the fact that we do have a budget sitting within remuneration areas for advocacy positions as such. How that's achieved, whether it's done through elected members, the mayor or staff, as long as we are achieving the outcomes that you're asking us to do in the plans, I think that I don't think you need to make a resolution about it. I think we've probably got it pretty well covered.
Thanks, that's all from me. Thanks.
Thank you, councillor. Look, I'm really pleased to see this reporting coming through for the first time, and it's new. And I guess my question to the management team is, what else is, now that you've got this information, we've got this process, what have you changed in terms of the other systems that support getting positive outcomes in terms of incentives, performance objectives, feedback loops, reviews with the senior leadership team? I mean, how are you incorporating this new reporting into that broader management process? How are you thinking about it?
Yeah, so kind of the expectations, I guess, is because what will happen out of here is once these are signed off, then we'll start having a look, as well as the business and operational risks that tag into each of the strategic risks as well. You've already heard in response to a couple of the questions today, particularly if I use business continuity as an example, in emergency management, that we are, as we've gone through this process, it's clearly highlighted some gaps in some of the things that we're currently doing. We already do. There is a lot in here that is business as usual. We've probably taken to shift the dial on some of these areas, and I think I used that term earlier on, is probably not some big shifts that we need to change things from ineffective to effective, and the like in that as well. We've probably maybe taken a little bit more of a conservative lens across the control ratings associated with some of these things, and to highlight that they are still things that we need to make sure we've ticked the box or signed some things off in terms about how we go about our business to ensure that these risks are being mitigated to some way, shape or form. So I think we've, the team, Stephen, Desiree and the team are doing a really good job in this space. It's highlighted some of these things that haven't been highlighted through governance previously. It's giving us some clear direction about how we go about things. They've been monitored and measured through a senior leadership team, and they'll be also my expectation is that our managers in the organisation are also taking care of these, as well as the business risks that are associated with each of their activity areas.
So in other words, the mitigations, the actions are being built into the performance management system through the organisation. Would that be a fair comment? Can I take that from that answer?
Yes, because the risks that have been identified here should go down into the business and operations. Some of them will sit right across the organisation. Health and safety is a good example of that. It's not just a strategic risk that sits at the senior leadership team level. It sits right across our organisation. So each business should actually probably be having, will have something about health and safety, about how they go about managing those. And you've had papers previously that talk about the business processes. And what this committee is asking us to do is now go in and start doing some deep dives into some of these areas, and health and safety is one of those, doing a review about how well the process is, how well are we doing in that activity to make sure that things are being mitigated, and potentially as a result of that report, some of the ratings, control ratings, will potentially change in the strategic risks as a result of that.
Okay. Thank you for that. The list is empty, so I think we've dealt with questions. So thank you, Desiree and Stephen, and the management team, everyone involved in getting us to this point. We have a recommendation that the committee received the following risk assessments: strategic risks 5, 8, 9, 10 and 11, and the strategic dashboard. And I'm happy to move that. Councillor Naylor will second that. And we will throw that now open to commentary. And Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yep, once again, a really good report. There's a lot of detail in all of those risk profiles that have been included. I guess, yes, I'm happy to receive these. I do think there's still some changing that could be made to some of these. In particular, a couple I just want to comment on. The strategic risk number 5, in terms of the stakeholder engagement, that key category of central government advocacy being ineffective and the sole action plan being consideration for budget allocation for advocacy, I think just too narrow. It's too narrow a way to look at that. As I kind of alluded to in my questioning, I think a key role for elected members is to be in that space. I'd like to see that included in terms of the considerations that are included for that. My recollection when we added 100k to the budget a few years back to create that advocacy role, personally I didn't see a great level of outcome from having that role. No offence to whoever was in that role, but you know, just simply adding budget allocation for things like this is not always the best way to address this. So I'd really like to see the utilisation of elected members included as a part of the consideration for the action plan for that. Just also looking at the strategic risk number 11, the loss of public trust in council, and noting the CE's comments. My personal view on that, whilst I do acknowledge the interconnected nature of the risks, that all the other ones do have an impact on that, I personally would still prefer to have that retained as a risk for the purpose of just keeping the oversight of that and us not losing focus of it. So that would be my perspective on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I also wanted to add my appreciation of the thoroughness and the detail in this report. I really enjoyed reading it. I just wanted some points also, like Councillor Naylor, on strategic risk 11, that loss of public trust. I remember the debate that we had on that back in March it was maybe, when we adopted these strategic risks. And it was quite an interesting debate because there was quite a lot of difference of opinion about whether loss of public trust is a driver of risk, whether it's a result or an outcome of risk, or whether it's just an inherent risk in its own right. And at that time that I argued that it could actually fit across all 3 of those categories, because it can be a driver of risk when we have it in mind when we make our decisions, but also as an inherent risk because there are external fluctuations in public mood which do impact the perception of trust that the public have in us, for which we might not be responsible. And then, of course, it is obviously can also be a result or an outcome of some of the other risks being realised. And I think because it does fit across all 3 of those categories, I do agree with Councillor Naylor that it's worth having there in its own right, because that also comes with a set of actions which ensure that we have this at front of mind when we make our decisions, our social licence and the public trust in us. And if we look at the results of the resident survey, that's just reinforced that view that the public trust in us is trending downwards consistently. And we may do all the other stuff really, really well, and we may still not improve the public's trust in us. So I think it's really important to still have it there. But thank you very much for all the work on the report.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wanting to, again, highlight the strategic risk of 11 around the loss of confidence or loss of public trust in council. Thank you for the prompt to our CE around do we need it or not, but I would say that local government is quite dynamic, and we could be doing a whole bunch of things still quite well in these other risk factors, but our engagement with our community and how they perceive us, or even how they perceive central government and reflect on us, is very real. And there's a number of things out of our control. We've had waters going from one extreme again back and forth to another, which I think at a pace that's really unhelpful. and that we're still got to consult with our community and feel like they're getting a fair voice in that, when actually their optionality and our optionality might not be that wide and great. And so these forced positions that we need to take, whether we go out and do a around Māori wards, for example, that's being forced upon us, is just it's not helpful for our relationship. And so that's one point I wanted to put in. And these measures or controls, I think, are helpful for an action plan to keep that in the forefront. It's not just on officers. I think we take that as a team view, and our responsibility to kind of have checks and balances that we're on track in the ratings and the resilience. I think it's very important. So don't want to underestimate that. And for now, I'm happy to keep it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before coming to the additional recommendation, just some general comments, because I can't resist now that a few of my colleagues have weighed in around risk number 11 after the prompting. And, you know, so my read of that, I suppose, is to think about how do we actually get to grips with understanding what that even is? And where does that conversation start? And who does it start with? And does it just start within this building, or is it actually us going out and talking to some people in the community and going, what would increase your trust in council? What would decrease your trust in council? And using that information to help build an action plan. My concern is that what we have in this particular risk is a risk description that is very much framed around inadequacy of delivery, and I agree that that's one thing that absolutely can undermine public trust over time. But I'm not sure it's the only thing, and I'd be much more interested in a broad conversation to start this particular risk assessment out before moving too far into a lot of actions that may or may not have actually ascertained what the actual risk is and heard that directly from the community who are part of the relationship in that space. So that's my general comment on that. I would like to go ahead and as indicated, introduce an additional recommendation here. And this really hopefully will come to screen soon, but just really seeks to, I suppose, make sure that as we look forward with this, that we take a reporting approach that is, you know, most helpful for us as elected members in terms of serving in our roles. We've been on a bit of a journey, obviously, with this in terms of having an upfront debate around what our risk appetites were across a whole range of risks and what the individual should be around that. And we've now had pretty much the first generation of assessments on this. My interest looking forward is making sure that we have really good information coming through so that we are firstly differentiating between what's simply business as usual ongoing actions and what are new actions, that we're connecting actions with resourcing, at least to know if an action has a resourcing implication or not as a start, and perhaps some quantification of that, and that we start to get some visibility around progress timeframes and I guess by proxy prioritization. So I appreciate the Chief Executive's responses in the question time, and I think to my mind quite a bit of this is consistent with that. I think this is just making sure that we as elected members take this opportunity to be really clear that we're now at a really important transition point between seeing an initial generation of assessments and actually now seeing those turn into some more useful information for us moving forward. So would hope, colleagues, that you're in a position to support that additional recommendation. Certainly thank officers for wading into a very, very challenging area, like when you look across all those strategic risks across the time that's been put in those, pointing to go those dashboards, and there's a lot of good information in there, so do genuinely appreciate the efforts that have been put, and would hope that the officers read my number of questions and the directness as an indication of interest primarily. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies for lateness. I was just at the MASH Trust annual meeting, so it's important. There's a conflict there, but it's important that the city goes to those things. Look, I've just come in at the tail end of this conversation, but I too want to just comment on risk 11 because everyone else is. But look, it is real, and that loss of public trust in council, you know, I look at some of the outside influences and we get mixed up in it, and it really is at a loss of trust and authority in other entities as well, in government agencies, central government, and I mean that government policies, and that's government of all colours. The flip-floppiness which Councillor Dennison sort of spoke about, and actually some of our other local government colleagues. So we get mixed up in that at times, and the loss of public trust is interesting. You know, I follow things, I see things in the paper where people will send a text in and all the money that the city's wasting on this and that, and they just don't understand that they're an NZTA initiative, or it's another government agency that does something, or another council that does something. But we get lumbered with it at times. So it's really a loss of public trust in, I think, authority and government in general, of whether it's regional, local, central, and their policies. So thanks to the officers, it is pretty thorough. Could I just ask one question of the CE on recommendation number 2, because I had no knowledge that was coming forward, and appreciate that the mover and seconder probably have had a discussion about it, possibly with other elected members. But is there actually any resourcing that's required to resource that that recommendation? Because we do talk about resourcing and that at length in this chamber, and we often add extra things in all the time. So I just want to know, will that take, before I vote, will that take extra resource, or is that something that can be carried out as business as usual?
Yeah, through the chair, it would be Stephen and team, I would imagine, adding in some columns to the right-hand side of the action items, just identifying where resources and that are. Most of it would be teams that are already currently working on it.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll support that as well. Thank you.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to say thank you to Stephen for the work that you've done on this. It's great work that you've done with this work. In particular, the dashboard. I think the dashboard is really good at identifying the 11 risks and identifying owners for each risk. I think that's really important to go forward, and each risk has got an owner. And as discussed, it's now got an action plan and a control so that each owner will then take responsibility for all the risks. So I think we were not going to get muddled up between governance and management. So the owner of the risk will then go ahead and work through the actions. And then if there is a resourcing issue, then they will deal with it, and the resourcing issue will come back through, and then that will come back through the CE, and the CE will then decide whether or not that needs more resourcing, and that's where the whole resourcing issue will come back through the CE. So I think now that they've all got owners, that's the best thing that this could possibly happen. So I think it's a really good structure, it's a good way to deal with the risks, and it's a good way to manage it going forward. So well done, Stephen. Well done for putting this forward, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly to comment on Councillor Barrett's suggestion of going out to the community and getting feedback as to what their views are of public risk or perception of trust in council. I feel we've already done that. That's perhaps why I was looking perplexed when you made that comment. I mean, I look here, the top 3 concerns in our resident survey was road maintenance, sensible spending decisions and rates being too high, with value for money having the highest impact of public perception of council performance. So I feel like we've already done a lot of that work, and it's quite clear what the public, or what certainly impacts public decision making. We had a workshop here from those who conducted the survey, and they expressed that value for money was one of the key drivers behind public perception of council's performance. And so I feel often in this chamber we suggest that we're quite perplexed as to why trust in council is falling, and I personally am not perplexed by it. I think it's very well articulated in our resident survey, and yes, there's more work perhaps we could do to identify that. But I don't know if these strategic risks that are outlined here in number 11, I mean, yes, they're good. And of course, if these were to fail, we would lead to further degradation of council. You know, for example, code of conduct is identified as an effective measure with a low reliance. And absolutely, if we were to fail a code of conduct issue, we were seeing significant code of conduct complaints being made by councils like some other councils do, that would impact public trust in council. But I think more to the point, it's already quite clearly articulated around public perception of council spending and council decision making, and I think that really comes into the communication with the public sector, which has been identified in this report, and perhaps some additional actions could be in there around how we communicate with the public, particularly on what the Mayor's talking about regarding spending decisions that actually aren't our responsibility. I know there's a lot of criticism that people say to me, William, what about the buses? And I go, well, that's not our council. So there could be more we could do in terms of our public communication, but I just thought it was important to note that I feel we already have done a lot of that work, and that could be better utilised, because it does sometimes get left to sit as a report that then doesn't go anywhere. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson, sorry. Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. No, I just had to pop into the queue there because I think that Councillor Wood has conflated two things that are not the same. So people's lack of trust in council is not the same as people's dissatisfaction with council performance. And I think to say, well, we know what the cause of a reduction in trust is, it's because people want lower rates, is drawing a very long bow. So I don't agree that we already have the answers, that they're already in the survey. The survey told us the areas that of performance that people were concerned about, but that doesn't necessarily equate to reasons for why there's a lack of trust. I mean, we could speculate, but for instance, a lack of trust might be because they don't feel that they've been communicated with adequately, or they feel that they made a submission and we didn't do what they said, so they don't trust us to listen to them, or those are entirely separate matters to dissatisfaction with council performance over certain areas. And so I think it's wrong to say that they're the same thing that we already know. I don't think we do know. And so I support Councillor Barrett's suggestions that a little bit more of a deep dive into reasons for lack of trust would be useful. Although I also agree, with the Mayor's comments that actually it probably is, since it's happening to every other council across the country, it probably is symptomatic of a lack of trust in authority rather than in us personally in Palmerston North. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything about it, but you do need to understand the wider environment in which these things are happening. But I absolutely refute the idea that, well, we've done a survey and people think that we should be doing better on roading and providing better value for money, and that explains why they've lost trust in us. I don't think that's right at all. So sorry, I just had to come in and refute that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll treat this as a right reply, I suppose, and just acknowledge Councillor Johnson for probably far more clearly articulating my thoughts on this than I ever could have. But I think that's my general take, is we would be poorly placed to conflate happiness or popularity with trust. I think they're different things, and we need to have that kind of deeper look and consideration of what actually builds trust between a council and a community, and what can be done over time to improve that, and would emphasize again my point made initially, that I think that the scoping of this is potentially too narrow by just putting it down to delivery. So look forward to seeing this all evolve, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to briefly exercise a right reply that strayed a little bit beyond my additional recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd just like to add my comments that we've made tremendous progress, and there's been very, very good work completed here. The challenge in this now is to make sure that we build it into the DNA of everything we do, and that we're clear on ownership, that we're clear on specific measurable outcomes and goals to mitigate risk, and that we see and make sure that we tick the box, get the nail through the piece of wood on all of those things. And that's a management challenge. It's new, and I guess the challenge is to think about how you build that into the existing processes you have around performance management, prioritisation, resource allocation. But I think it's excellent progress and well done to the team. So we have an additional recommendation as set out that came partway through this commentary. So I'll throw the floor open again for any elected members who may wish to comment further on item 2. And if there are no comments, then I would propose that we take both those recommendations together. So are there any further comments or thoughts? No? Okay, so then I'm happy to move both, and Councillor Naylor, happy to second? Right. Done and done. So we'll just put this to the vote. Thank you. Thank you for helping. Obviously, 12 votes in favour. So that brings us now to item 12 on the agenda, which is the committee work schedule on page 91. And Wade, I assume you'll deal with this?
Yeah, through the chair, no further comments to make. We'll look forward to catching up next year, and strategic risk management will be on there again.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just one quick question on the last page there, LTP debrief 2025. Can I just check the timing of that? Will that be in this term of council?
Unless Mr Murphy has got a comment to make, I'll just might have to take it on notice.
Was that in relation to the LTP debrief?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess through you, Mr Mayor, Mr Chair, sorry. I know with the changes in business assurance resourcing, that work started but hasn't been finalised. So yeah, I'll probably just have to take that on notice and check in with the business assurance team and chief executive. We were potentially looking at, once we make an appointment to the new LTP manager role, getting that person to finish that work, bearing in mind that they'd be neutral because they weren't involved in the previous LTP. So, but at the moment it hasn't been advanced due to the limited resourcing in business assurance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. There are no further questions. We have a recommendation that the committee receive its work schedule dated November 2024. Happy to move that. Councillor Naylor seconds that. Any comments? Councillor Naylor?
Thanks. Really, I'm probably stating the obvious a little bit here, but just to simply say that that LTP debrief would really be the most valuable if it's done by the current council, and that the current council receive the feedback and any recommendations from that. I think if it was to roll over to the new term, it would seem a bit pointless, really. So, but noting the comments in terms of the restraints, I can appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor. No further comments, so we'll put that recommendation to the vote. And that's been carried unanimously, 12 votes in favour. And that brings us to our agenda, our last meeting for the year. So thank you very much to all elected members and management. And I feel we've made good progress during the year. And I'd now like to call on Councillor Zabelin to close our meeting with a karakia. Thank you, Councillor.
Ngā mihi, Mr Chair. Me kare ki a tātou. Kia puta ki te whaiau, ki te ao marama, whakamaua kia tīna. Haumie, huie, tae ki e. Hold up.
Thank you very much, everyone. Excellent.